Hello friends, welcome to our channel CBSE English The Topper's Choice. In today's video, we are going to discuss class 12th fourth story from the supplementary reader book Vistas, The Enemy. Here we go. At the beginning, we'll talk about the author of the story. Pearl S. Buck is the author of the story. Pearl Seidenstricker Buck was born on 26th June 1892 and died on 6th March 1973, also known by her Chinese name Tsai Zhenju. She was an American writer and novelist. As the daughter of missionaries, Buck spent most of her life before 1934 in Zhenjiang, China. Her novel, The Good Earth, was the best-selling fiction book in the United States in 1931 and 1932 and won the Pulitzer Prize in 1932 and was influential in Buck's winning the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1938. In 1938, she was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature for her rich and truly epic descriptions of peasant life in China and for her biographical masterpieces. She was the first American woman to win the Nobel Prize in Literature. Theme of the story. The story, The Enemy, deals with the conflict between a man's duty towards the state and towards his own conscience. In fact, the story raises questions about the ethics of a human being at the time of war. Dr. Sadao has been brought up in a traditional and patriotic environment and he dislikes Americans. But at the same time, he is a doctor and cannot let the American bleed to death. The story condemns racial discrimination and hails the superiority of humanity above any other thing. The Enemy gives a message that humanism transcends all man-made prejudices and barriers. Dr. Sadao upholds the ethics of medical profession in treating an enemy. The story is a great lesson of peace, love, sympathy, fellow feeling, and humanism. Introduction to the story. The story, The Enemy, takes place on a coastal town of Japan in the year 1941, when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. A war was going on between America and Japan. Japanese were hostile to the Americans and ready to kill any American found in their soil. The story highlights how a Japanese doctor saves the life of an American prisoner of war and rises above narrow national prejudices. He risks his honor, career, position, and life by sheltering a war prisoner of the enemy camp and saving his life. The author has beautifully portrayed the conflict in a doctor's mind as a private individual and as a citizen with a sense of national loyalty. Now we'll discuss the summary of the story. The story, The Enemy, is set in Japan during World War II. Dr. Sadao Hoki, a skilled and renowned surgeon and scientist, was not sent to combat because he was needed to treat a prominent general. Thus, he and his wife Hannah, also Japanese, but whom he met in America when both were studying abroad, were at home one evening, looking out at the ocean and mist creeping through the pines, when they spotted a dark shape in the surf that turned out to be a white man. He was a severely wounded soldier. His gunshot wound worsened by the rocks. At first, they wondered if they should let him die, especially since they realized he was an American and an escaped prisoner of war. Then they considered whether or not to turn the man over to authorities. Sadau's training as a doctor kicked in, and neither could bring themselves to let the man die, so the two agreed to take him back to their home. Sadao treated his injuries as an act of humanitarian compassion consistent with his professional ethics. He carried out an operation on the unconscious young man, and even though the man was in poor shape, it was clear he would live. Sadao and Hana informed their servants of this decision, who made no secret of their belief that the man should have been left to die. Yumi, their young children's nurse, told her mistress that the servants were worried. After a week of treating the white man and helping him recover from his life-threatening injuries, the servants quit when their ultimatum that the man would be turned over to the authorities was met by the doctor's steadfast resolve and Hannah's pride of authority. Meanwhile, the soldier, who actually seemed more like a boy of 17, now that he was clean and growing healthier, thanked the doctor for saving his life. The doctor warned him not to be premature with this assessment, insisting that he wanted to know nothing about him, not even his name. Dr. Sadao made it clear that the young man was troublesome for his home, but that he had a duty to treat him. The young man understood. One day, however, he blurted out to Hannah that his name was Tom, and another day he marveled to Sadao that if all Japs were like him, maybe they would not have gone to war. When a messenger arrived for Sadao, Hannah was terrified that the servants had spilled the beans and they were about to be punished. Instead, the message directed Sadao to a patient consultation with the general. He was very ill and would likely die without the surgical skill of the doctor. Sadao chose to confess to the general the situation with the injured prisoner. The general, in a display of self-interest over duty, agreed to keep the secret. After all, if he would turn in the doctor, then Sadao would likely be executed, and the general needed the doctor alive in order to prolong his own life. They reached an agreement. The general would send his own private assassins to kill Tom quietly and cleanly one night as he sleeps. After a few days, the prisoner had not been assassinated and had recovered much of his strength, which intensified the doctor's fear. Since it seemed the general had changed the plans they agreed upon, Sadao took it upon himself to arrange the man's nighttime escape. He told Tom there was an abandoned island off the coast where he could wait to be picked up by a Korean fishing boat. The doctor would provide him with supplies and he could flash a signal using a flashlight if he needed more. Tom was reluctant, but knew that he had no other choice. So he departed as Sadao had instructed. Not long after that, Sadao was called in for emergency surgery to save the general's life. When the general was strong enough to receive the news, Sadao told him that his prisoner somehow escaped in the night. The general confessed that he was worried about his own life to the degree that he had completely forgotten the assassination agreement. He then lamented that it was simply a case of carelessness and most certainly not a dereliction of duty or lack of patriotism. The two men struck a deal to keep secrets secret, with the general promising Sadao that he would be rewarded. One night, the sun set without a signal, informing the doctor that the escape was successful. This, Sadao thought, was his real reward. Other white faces from his past in America came to his mind, and he shuddered at how cruel, prejudiced, and simple many of them were. Such was the depth of his antipathy of the repulsive whites of the world that he told himself he was glad the country was at war with them. Then he mused to himself, "Strange, I wonder why I could not kill him." Now we'll discuss the main characters of the story. Number 1, Dr. Sadao. Dr. Sadao is a Japanese surgeon and scientist. He is brought up by his father, who was a staunch Japanese, devoted to his culture. Dr. Sadao becomes a skillful doctor and scientist to fulfill his father's wishes. His father sends him to America to study medicine. He wants him to study for the benefit of his country. Dr. Sadao doesn't even marry Hannah without his father's approval. He is so skilled that the general is totally dependent on him. The general has blind faith in him, which exemplifies him as a skillful and expert surgeon. Dr. Sadao is a loving husband and a good father. He consults and respects his wife. He is worried about the future of his kids in case he is arrested. He is meticulous and finally finds out a middle path. He feels happy to save the life of an American and to secure his and his family's future too. Number 2, Hannah. Hannah is an ideal wife, mother, and true Japanese. She is patriotic and humanitarian with a compassionate heart. She supports her husband in his each and every decision. Though she does not like the idea of saving the enemy, that is the American prisoner of war, she cannot neglect that before being an enemy, he was a human being first. She is a dignified lady who carries herself in a very controlled way without sacrificing her dignity when the servants refused to continue their services and defy her orders. Like any caring mother, she is worried about the future of her children in case Dr. Sadao is arrested for keeping the American in his house. Despite being worried, tensed, and scared, she never loses her cool amid critical situations. Number 3, Tom. The American POW means prisoner of war. Tom was the American prisoner of war who was shot and had escaped. Dr. Sadao found him on the shore outside his house in a wretched condition. He had bled a lot and had a deep wound. He might have to face tortures and pain and suffering. Dr. Sadao saved his life by operating upon him and taking out the bullet. Tom displayed a fighting spirit which was evident from his speedy recovery. He was surprised and overwhelmed by the generosity of Dr. Sadao and Hannah. He didn't want to leave their house as he felt secure there. Finally, with the help of Dr. Sadao, he was able to escape. Number 4, the general. The general is Japan's army general. He is Dr. Sadao's patient. He was old and ailing and had faith only in Dr. Sadao for treatment. That is one of the reasons that Dr. Sadao was not sent abroad with the Japanese army. The general himself was educated at Princeton and had more faith in the doctor trained in America than in Germany, as according to him, Americans had sentiments, but Germans were cruel. He assured Dr. Sadao of help in getting rid of the American soldier, but due to his self-absorption in his ailment, he forgot. When Dr. Sadao told him about the escape of the white man, he took the blame on himself and saved Dr. Sadao. The general knew the worth of Dr. Sadao as a surgeon and as a scientist, didn't want to lose him, so protected him till the end. Now we'll discuss the main points of the story. Dr. Sadao, a Japanese surgeon, finds a wounded American soldier on the beach near his house. He is unable to throw him back, though he was his enemy, as he was a doctor and his first duty was to save a life. Hannah, his wife, is initially reluctant to keep the enemy in the house because it was dangerous for all, including the children. But later on joins her husband in operating and nursing the enemy soldier back to health, even though the servants desert the house. Hannah assists Dr. Sadao in operating the soldier in spite of her physical discomfort and hesitation. Though it was wartime and all hands were needed at the front, the general did not send Sadao with the troops, as he is an expert surgeon and the general needed him. Sadao tells him about the enemy soldier, but he does not take any action as he is self-absorbed and forgets his promise that he would send his private assassins to kill the enemy and remove his body. Taking advantage of the general's self-absorption, Dr. Sadao decides to save the soldier's life. After the soldier is out of danger, Dr. Sadao helps him to escape from his house to safety. So dear friends, if you have liked this video, please click on like, subscribe the channel and click on the bell icon to get more videos like this. Thank you very much for watching.